Hello.
Hello, Mr. Radislav. Nice to hear you. Mr. Radislav Kidzia is Vice President of Huawei Technology in Central and East European Nordic region. I look forward to have you on the conference. And please be our guest and present us your presentation.
Thank you for having me. It's real pleasure to present. I will start as soon as the screen loads. I don't see it yet.
Yes, just a second.
Yes, that's now we have it. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we are participating in security conferences, and one conclusion comes to us each time we see that the presentations come from many parties of the world, right? Previously, we heard a presentation from Ukraine. We are having a conference in Slovenia. This means that cybersecurity is really a global issue. Anyone can be attacked, and anyone can be attacked from anywhere, right? So actually, for global problems, we need to have global solutions. And let me take you through both global issues and global proposals, global solutions for security of 5G. So actually, one of the most cybersecurity topics of the last months, if not years. Please, next slide. So you probably heard about what 5G is going to bring to the table. Speed of lighting, almost. Latency in terms of ping end-to-end at the level of 1 millisecond. Extreme flexibility, so you can dedicate and divide the network virtually into slices and provide a completely different quality of service to different classes of customers. You've seen that in the press, in the marketing, but is it hope or is it hype? I can tell you right now that if you are talking about the speed per connection like 10 gigabits, or we are talking about 1 millisecond of latency, it is still hype. We are not yet there. Also because 5G will be introduced gradually. So we are currently in the very first phase of deployment. All the promises, all the promises the technology has made and is going to bring are not yet there. But on the other hand, it is a huge hope, especially for operators, because, ladies and gentlemen, the data traffic in mobile networks grows 40% year by year. And actually, during the COVID lockouts, it has grown 40 to 50% over a couple of months. The result is that in a year to two maximum, the capacity of the radio mobile networks we currently run will be saturated. So not only we will not have a faster internet, we will not have a mobile internet at all. And operators have a simple choice. Either they need to increase the density of the networks, actually put more base stations into under the current technology, so LTE, or they need to invest into something which is essentially more cost effective. It will give them more bang for the bucks and will be also more efficient, especially in terms of power consumption. And this is 5G. So for mobile operators, it is a hope that they will be able to expand the capacity of their networks at a reasonable price in terms of investment per bit. Next slide, please. But it is not only a hope for operators, because 5G smells money. The global market around 5G ecosystem is valued up to $1 trillion over the next couple of years. And it is no wonder that each and every country which thinks of itself as an aspiring economy tries to position itself, as we speak, on a global map and in a global value chain. The gold in 5G is for the daring. There is a report from Deloitte which says that being late to the table, being late with the development will mean that the country or operator which is late will lose the competitive edge for at least a decade, right? So actually, no wonder that all the countries are trying. And let me take you through the smart. What is the business on 5G currently being experimented? First, Korea. Korea doesn't have a huge business-to-business market, but they do have an interesting cases in consumer market. For instance, imagine that after the introduction of 5G networks in South Korea, um, uh, the service which actually caught up out of a sudden was virtual reality. Previously, only roughly 5% of network users were interested in the service. In 5G, 50% of the users, so by the factor of 10, is actually actively using the services. And not only that, the revenue per user has been increased almost 2 times. So actually there is money on 5G, even in the services which we would maybe consider less important, which is normally the consumer market. But actually even in the consumer market, you can actually provide much more value if you think that latency and bandwidth will give people simply a better experience, more immersion into services based on virtual reality. China. Actually, most of the really tested and proven and large-scale business model will be coming from China, because the maturity of 5G network in China is much higher than most of other countries. Just to give you some context, in a country like, for instance, Poland, you have 40,000 base stations. In the whole Europe, you might have 1 million, but actually the plan for 5G base station in China for this year is 4 million. They're actually much more ahead. And if you add scale, it will make many of the business cases easier to present. So actually, they use 5G for manufacturing, for steering factories. They use it for logistics. So actually, autonomous or semi-autonomous driving or remotely steered cars or machines are being introduced. Agriculture, so actually using a rice farm automated and monitored on 5G is something you really need to see. And all these cases are fueled by a huge scale. So actually, we expect pretty good business cases coming from China. In Europe, we also have interesting things to say and to do. Operators and companies invest in manufacturing. There are interesting cases in Switzerland in precision manufacturing because of the limited latency of the technology. We have implementations in seaports. We have implementation in smart cities and campus networks, and agriculture also is an interesting use case, but we lack scale in Europe. As I say, while the East is increasingly best in technology, the West is still best in, the US is still best in business. We in Europe seems to be competing on regulation. And this is not what's giving us the scale of technology and business to actually ramp up 5G business cases very quickly. In USA, it's interesting because if you look at the use cases, the initial experiments in 5G, you can pretty much joke what are the people doing in different parts of the world. In US, for instance, they like to watch a good sports and have a good steak afterwards, because the most interesting use cases currently circle around the video transmission of sport events, which is upgraded because of the larger capacity, and agriculture, which is mostly farming, but actually we are talking about cattle. If you imagine that the biggest cattle farms in US have an area of a substantial percentage of many European countries, you can easily imagine that a good broadband wireless network can be used to monitor the cattle for the well-being and other life parameters, and actually it increases the efficiency. So next slide, please. But how does the 5G network actually look like? As we speak, as the networks are being rolled out in Europe, very little will change compared to 4G, because all what will happen is that 5G base stations will be connected to existing 4G networks. So what is it that is going to change? Only the capacity of the network and the speeds. Those will be the parameters which will be noticed by the consumers and by network operators. But in terms of the network flexibility, in terms of latency, in terms of security, nothing will change. So actually, it is very good that we are having a heated discussion around cybersecurity, because it's crucial and it's important, but it's also quite early, which is also good. If you click one more time, the slide will show what will happen in approximately 2 to 3 years. Could you please click on the... Yes. In 2 to 3 years, the 5G will be extended back to the core network. And the core network is exactly which it is the brain of the network. So this is where all the functions we mentioned in terms of flexibility, in terms of increased security, will be implemented. The good news is that 5G network in terms of security will be better than 4G by definition, by the standard. The second good news is that it will be based on a more familiar technologies. We are talking about cloud, we are talking about virtualization, we are talking about HTTP2, we are talking about RESTful APIs, we are talking about JSON for the data structure. These are technologies which are familiar to a wider pool of experts, wider pool of cybersecurity experts as well, which brings hope that actually 5G will not suffer that much from the pain that we all experience, which is the lack of skilled and qualified human resources. Please click one more time. And here we see another cloud. As I mentioned, 5G core network will be based on cloud and virtualization. This will be the default implementation method, but it will not be the only cloud in 5G network. The multi-access edge computing is the answer how to realize the famous 1 millisecond latencies, because if you calculate how far do you need to be from your application to achieve 1 millisecond latency, so end-to-end ping, right? You would need to be, right, 140 kilometers from the server, which is not what mobile networks are all about, right? You cannot tie your customers around your base stations and ask them to actually be within the reach of 100 kilometers from their applications. What you need to do in order to decrease latency, you need to move applications towards the user. And in the architecture point of view, it means that yes, you have a bit of core network which will be geographically, however, moved closer to the edge. And this is the famous multi-access edge computing, which will be another private cloud or clouds, which will be hosting applications very sensitive to latencies. And as I say, in terms of standards, in terms of the default, 5G will be more secure than 4G. So actually, anyone, any country, any operator which really cares for increasing the security of mobile network should be rolling out 5G as soon as possible. Delays are very dangerous for the business, as we discussed before, because we are losing the competitive edge for a decade at least, and we are losing money. According to some Oxford economics research, for a country like Slovenia, delays in implementation of 5G would be translated eventually into as much as 150 million euro of annual GDP loss, right? So actually, this is the result of not being on time with the solution. If you are not offering solution to the world, you are the consumer and you are developing slower, unfortunately. So the message is good in terms of security. However, 5G is also more complicated. If you could take us to the next slide. If you put a magnifying glass into this multi-access edge computing cloud, the small private cloud which sits close to the base station, you will notice that the scenarios get complicated because you have someone who is the owner of the cloud infrastructure. You have someone who is the owner of various applications which are running on this infrastructure. And actually, depending on who is the owner of the cloud, you have also different methods to connect it to the core network, to the core mobile network. So actually, another entity residing on this cloud application might be a core network function of provided by the operator. So there is one way to actually get all the entities work in harmony, which is isolation. It is crucial in multi-access edge computing 5G to isolate everything from everything. And you cannot trust anyone. Each and every application, each and every entity can be by definition treated as untrusted. We are not talking about any trusted vendors. Such a thing doesn't really exist in architecture, in security architecture. The basis for 5G architecture is a zero trust architecture. You have different stakeholders, you have different applications, you have different platforms, different methods of connecting those platforms to the core. So actually we need to isolate and establish trust first. Next slide, please. We need to be also aware that the ecosystem of 5G from security point of view is not only operators, it's not only suppliers, it's not only customers. All of these layers work together hand in glove because suppliers may not provide perfect equipment. Operators need to take it into account and provide additional security and control layer. Customers are not given an end-to-end security from operators because it's not in 5G standards. It's not possible. So if they provide an applications which requires end-to-end security, they need to provide it at the application layer and the other way around as well. So actually, if you are looking at the whole ecosystem from a global perspective or from a regulator perspective, you need to address all those actors and you need to require, so you need to ask to fulfill specific security requirements, but you need to also check. And the question, how do you check, is actually an interesting one because there is no silver bullet in mobile networks. Next slide, please. Could you please just click 2 times? It will be, yes, thank you. In mobile network, there is one issue and mobile industry because the mobile industry hasn't to date produce a common and unified set of security requirements spanning through all these layers and spanning from supply chain through services, development, product, and up to handling incidents. So actually, if you wanted to cover all the ecosystem with security requirements, it would be sort of a patchwork of existing standards, like coming from ISO, coming from NIST, coming from OWASP, right? Actually, so you could always find a standard applicable to a specific area, but it will be a patchwork. The first initiative coming from the mobile industry, which strives to unify the security requirements for all the vendors, for instance, and allow independent verifications of those vendors, is something called Nessus. And I will talk about it shortly in the next slide. So next slide, please. Nessus is an effort from vendors which actually found it very difficult from a business perspective to be tested differently in each and every country they operate. If you take, for instance, Huawei, we operate in 170 countries. In each of these countries, we have 2, 3, 4 operators. So if you wanted to be independently verified and tested by each of the countries and each of the operators, it is very difficult to address from a business perspective, because our main job is not to be tested, but actually deliver solutions. So a while ago, a couple of years ago, vendors active in 3GPP, this is the organization preparing mobile telecommunication standards, figure out that they will prepare a unified and common for all the vendors set of security requirements for different classes of equipment. Then invited GSMA, which is an organization of operators, because it's not sufficient to test only equipment, right? Because a vendor could be lucky and deliver something which is good enough. So you need to verify whether this good result was the result of a repeatable process, and whether the security can be provided during the whole life cycle of the product. Think patching or vulnerability management, right? So actually what GSMA did, they designed a method how to verify the processes, security processes of vendors, combined this with technical specification, and created a scheme called Nessus, which is the first time in the history of mobile telecommunications, which is 30 years, give or take, where all the vendors of network equipment can be verified by independent third parties against the very same set of security requirements, both from technology and process point of view. Next slide, please.
Rafal, should we slow?
Yes, we are concluding precisely. I'm conscious of time. Is it perfect? No, it's not yet perfect. If you compare Nessus, for instance, to common criteria at the assurance level 4+, which is, a good, decent level of assurance you could expect from 5G equipment, it is not yet there, right? Nessus is slightly better on the process side, because it's more adjusted to telecommunications, and common criteria is standardized across the board. But in terms of methods of testing, Nessus is a little bit behind, or significantly behind, common criteria EL4. But the good news is, and this is the good news and the key message of the next slide, please. The good news is Nessus is made for evolution. In the very same way as the evolution of mobile networks, Nessus will be produced in releases. And the next release, which is scheduled already for December this year, will actually make Nessus very comparable to common criteria EL4+ assurance level. And not only that, it will make Nessus a very good candidate for European assurance scheme under the Cybersecurity Act. And this is what, for instance, Germany Security Service advocates, to have at the end of the day one uniform global standard of verification of vendors and their equipment for 5G mobile networks. And this is actually the global response to a global problem, right? Not actually focusing country by country on discussing whether we like this vendor or we don't like this vendor, because you don't connect the vendors to networks. You don't connect the vendors to electricity. You don't run your data through vendors, but you do run your data through equipment, right? Through the devices, which are parts of the networks. And this should be really put into the focus. And this is the hope of Nessus, maybe with the help of other common standards like common criteria, but this is the answer: certification, requirements, verification. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much.
If you have any questions, happy to take them.
Yes, first of all, I would like to say that 5G is not the future, but it's the present. And of course, I am sure that Huawei will have the important role always in this technology, and the solutions you bring on the table and on the market. I would like to invite you to the chat part where is the question for you, and please stay with us till the end of the day. And thank you very much again for the excellent presentation.
Thank you very much.